Welcome back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast. My name's Kevin Stoller, and I am joined with Sean Patel today. We are going to be talking about SAT and entrance exams for colleges, and I'm sure we're going to get into a bunch of other things. But Sean, first, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, do you mind giving your story for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share my story. So my name's Sean Patel. I'm the founder and CEO of Prep Expert. I got a perfect SAT score myself, and I've helped over 100,000 students improve their test scores, get into top colleges, and win over $100 million in college scholarships. But before all that, I can tell you a little bit about my personal story, which is probably going to sound very similar to many of the students and parents of students listening to this podcast. What do I mean by that? I mean, I was a really good student in high school. However, I was not a very good standardized test taker. I had a lot of test anxiety. My parents didn't go to college in the United States. I didn't know the first thing about test prep, college admissions, scholarships, any of that stuff. And on the very first SAT I ever took in high school, I barely scored above average. And so I spent hundreds of hours in the library self-studying for the SAT, eventually was able to teach myself methods and strategies to raise my score 640 points to a perfect score. That completely changed my life, got into some top universities, as well as won $500,000 in college scholarships. And so when I got to college, I wanted to help other students improve their test scores the way that I did when I was in high school. I created Prep Expert, and in the very first 6-week SAT course that I ever taught, my students had an average score improvement of 376 points.
That's crazy.
That's equivalent of taking it's really equivalent to taking a student from the 50th percentile and putting them in the 90th percentile. So I began training other instructors to teach my curriculum, and the rest is history. As I mentioned, over the past 12 years, we've helped over 100,000 kids now improve their SAT and ACT scores, get into their dream universities, and most importantly to me, though, and I'm happy to talk about it today, is win those scholarships to reduce their cost of college. And so now, we've been doing that for 12 years at prepexpert.com, teaching SAT courses, got a new book out called Prep Expert Digital SAT Playbook, and happy to talk about all of it.
Yeah, and you launched this company while you were going through med school, or after you already finished up med school?
Oh, yeah. I totally missed my whole educational background. Yes. I've been through a lot of school, too. So I did my bachelor's in biology on a full ride scholarship at the University of Southern California. I was in a medical program there. So I also got my medical degree from USC, got my MBA from Yale University, and I did dermatology residency at Temple University Hospital. So I've been in school for a very long time. And I launched the company actually when I was in college, scaled it as I was in med school, business school, and residency, and now I'm full-time CEO. I still do some dermatology I do mainly teledermatology just to keep my diagnostic skills and licensing up. But it's been a long journey, and let me tell you, it's having a side hustle is difficult, but definitely worth it. And now it's not my side hustle; now it's my full hustle. And it's been very exciting. I love being an entrepreneur, and happy to talk about that here today.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that too, and your experience on Shark Tank and working with Mark Cuban, and we'll get into that. For our audience, we're really looking at how do we improve education. So I really want to dig in because I feel like you're right in the heart of it, of in the K-12 world. I always started out and be like, if you look at the mission of like any school district or any school, you can kind of get it broken down to they either care about getting kids into college or getting kids into a better college. And that becomes like their starting point. And then they kind of work backwards and figure like, how do we do this? Like, how do we do it? Now, there's been some change. COVID changed it a little bit. But from your perspective, what do you see from working with your parents and your students and things like that? Are they feeling like, okay, like my school experience is just something to get through so that I can now get to where I really want to be, which is college or that next stage, like setting them up for their career?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's so many philosophical debates around this. But from my perspective, I think that it's still very, I know there's even a debate on whether college is even important, right? In today's economy, et cetera. But my perspective is all the data, all the research shows that, people who go to college end up having higher earnings, making more money on the average. Of course, you can, do a trade and not go to college and be very successful. But I'd say that on average, if you look at the average research and data, it is important to go to college. Now, the question is, and I think this is a really important question that a lot of people miss, is college supposed to be an outcome or an opportunity, right? So is an outcome of all the hard work that students have put in from their high school, their GPA, their extracurriculars, their testing, et cetera. And then you get an outcome of what college do I get to go to? Or is it an opportunity that should be equal for all at the end, and it really doesn't matter what you did in high school? I would say it's probably a little bit of both, but from my perspective, I do think that the most important part of education, whether it's high school, whether it's college, whether it's standardized tests, is not necessarily the content that you learn, but the habits and the traits that you develop. So, I always tell people when I studied hundreds of hours in the libraries for the SAT, that developed in me a ton of self-control, a ton of hard work, a ton of delayed gratification, time management. These are all skills that you need to have to be successful in any career that you go into, whether that's being a doctor, a lawyer, an entrepreneur like yourself. These are all skills that you need to learn. So that's really what I think schools should be teaching, whether you do that through standardized tests, whether you do, and I think standardized tests do hold some value to doing that because you work hard, it's merit-based, and you have to practice these skills. But whether you do that through your schoolwork, whether you do that in college, people learn it at different aspects in their education. And a lot of people don't even learn it in education. They learn it in their career, and they just start working and they learn these skills. But that's really what education is for, is to teach you the skills to be successful. And there's so much study. I'm sure you're familiar with like the Stanford marshmallow experiment and all these traits are super important to be successful in your life, right? And so that's what I think is missing in education. And people get caught up on, should we teach STEM? Should we teach liberal arts, et cetera? But really what you're teaching is these life skills to be successful more so than the content itself.
Yeah. So for you, you made that determination for yourself to say, hey, I guess the first time you took the SAT, did you do a lot of prep, or did you just kind of go in there and be like, here's the test?
Kind of went in there cold like everyone else. Yeah. It didn't do so hot like everyone else.
So what was the trigger for you? Because I think your learnings are exactly what we're trying to get, like young people to get to, is like get that self-motivation. I love that you put a lot of that into the book of like, if you're doing this because your parents are telling you to do this, or because then you really have to examine like what you want before you really dig into it. But what was that for you? What was the trigger for you?
Yeah. I love that you read the book, Kevin. Yeah, there's a chapter called Harness Self-Motivation. Super important, right? And so for me, my motivation was I wanted two things. I wanted to become a physician. So I wanted to get into competitive medical programs that required a high SAT score. And two, I didn't want to go into student debt. So I wanted to get scholarships in college paid for, either through half tuition, full tuition scholarships. So that was my larger mission or motivation or goals, whatever you want to call it, that drove me to have the incentive to go to the library to study for the SAT rather than going to high school parties. Of course I went to some, but rather than just hanging out with my friends and, doing everything that would have led me astray. So I think that works for the SAT, sure, but it also works for anything else in your life, right? You need to have some other goal that motivates you, that's higher than yourself, and that is not a goal for someone else. As I mentioned in the book, Prep Expert Digital SAT Playbook, where your parents cannot be the person, parents are external motivator, right? So they are going to tell you as a child, you need to do this because of this. But unless your child or your student can have their own incentive, their own goal, or their own motivation to do something, it's not going to be as effective in motivating their behavior. And so that's my real motivation for students is, at least in the test prep world, I try to identify what's your bigger goal here. Is it scholarships like me? Is it a particular career like me? It might not be. It might be a particular university. It might be college athletics. We have a lot of student athletes. But no one wants a high SAT score just to have a high SAT score like that. And no one wants a high SAT score because their parents told them to have a high SAT score, right? So, but that framework works for, well beyond tests. It works in all of education. You have to develop self-motivation or harness self-motivation, as I call it, for students in order for them to become successful in education, as well as even adults in your careers. If you want to be successful in your career, you need to have some larger goal, purpose, and motivation.
Yeah. So this morning I was driving to the gym, and there's two stoplights that I come down on my way to the gym. One of them has a sensor on it, so it's like, and this is at like 5:30 a.m. So there's no one else on the road yet. And one of them has a sensor, and it's like you get really close to it, and immediately it turns green for me to go. This other one is on a timer, and it will stay red for like 3 minutes. And I have to come to this, like, I have this internal debate. This morning is the last time I had it, of like, do I just sit here for 3 minutes, or do I just go? There is no one around here. Like, there is no one near here. And I was thinking that, I'm like, there's so many times where we're going down this path just because the way. And I know my mind is a little different, and, you as an entrepreneur are a little different, and being like, all right, are we following this just because someone put some random rule out there, and now even though it's just dumb, like there's no one here, why can't this just be like a flashing like red light where it's like a stop sign and I can just go? Yeah. Or do we just follow the rules? And I'm bringing that story up of trying to figure out of like, if we're just essentially teaching to the test, like at what point, and I don't think this is a conversation for you and I to solve, but a conversation maybe our listeners to have, the school leaders and things, and like, what do we really want? Like, because at the end of the day, I agree with you. We want self-motivation. We want the kids to say, like, this is what I want to do, and be like, I want to learn it because I want to learn it, or this is the path that I want. And I've always struggled with, I'm like, well, if the system's dumb, shouldn't we try to change the system versus saying, hey, this is what it is? Because my fear, and we've seen it in the K-12 world, is that like everything went to how do we teach to standardized tests, or, make sure that these tests are at the level that they're at. I know I'm throwing a lot at you there, but just philosophically, like, what's your view on this? Because I agree with you. There's value on that, but there's also value on like 100 other things. Why are we putting so much value on this one versus something else?
Yeah, 100%. No, I don't think standardized tests are the best way or the only way to do it, for sure. However, I will say that, as a child, especially a young student, sometimes it's hard to get self-motivation. And so you do need to develop some frameworks for that student oftentimes to achieve certain goals, or, it goes back to this discussion about like, is college an opportunity or an outcome, where it's...
Which I love the way you phrase that, yeah.
Yeah, and, the other thing I think that's important to realize is like, with education, you do want to make it somewhat merit-based. And what I mean by that is, not everyone learns the same way, and there's different types of merit. But if everyone is equal, that ends up going down kind of a very slippery slope, as you might imagine, right? And so I think that it's important to give some frameworks to students. Now, is standardized testing the only framework? Absolutely not. People excel in creativity, artistry, all kinds of things that I think but it's important to measure and, give people achievement, because as I mentioned, things like merit-based, things like goals, things like motivation are really important. If you strip everything away and make everyone equal, I mean, you go to like socialism basically, and right.
Right.
I don't think that's what America is really about.
Yeah. And I think that's where I get to, and like reading your book, I'm like, yeah, this is as good or better than any other metric to evaluate. I think my mind always goes to like, well, change the system. Like, yeah, to your point of like, why do we even have to limit that? Like the whole system is this whole like competitive, even the way you use the phrasing of like winning scholarship. on there. I guess I'm curious to hear like why that terminology. It makes sense because it's exactly what they're doing, but that idea of like I have to win my way on there versus saying, hey, the opportunities are here for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important catch that you make, which is like I think it goes back to the concept of like American meritocracy. So if we think about meritocracy, capitalism, America, what is it all about? It's about working hard and getting rewarded for it, right? And so you either win things or you become the best at things, whether it's entrepreneurship or school, et cetera. And what's super interesting right now is the trend that so many colleges had for so long, which was removing test scores, right? Everyone knows, colleges went test optional with the pandemic, but now the trend is reversing, right? And so what just happened in the past few months? Yale reinstated SATs, Dartmouth, Brown, University of Texas, Austin. Why did they do that? Like, let's really dig into that. Well, one, they realized that it gives you so much more granularity, right? And so what do I mean by that? There's been so much grade inflation in the schools over the past 20 years that 47% of all high school seniors graduate with an A average. All right, so Kevin, when you and I went to school, A was exceptional. Now A is average. If half of the students have a 4.0 GPA, how can you tell anybody apart? How can anyone get merit-based winning of scholarships? How can you do anything like, oh, well, people will say, well, extracurricular activities. Okay, well, who can afford the best extracurricular activities and do the best summer programs and, do water polo and start nonprofits? That even favors the wealthy more, right? Well, what about your college admissions essay? Well, have you heard of something called ChatGPT? That doesn't help anymore. Differentiating, teachers' letters of recommendation. Everyone's going to say, the student's a superstar. So, like, how do you actually differentiate between students anymore? I don't have a good answer other than standardized testing. I don't know if you do. I'm curious to hear that.
Well, that's what I think is like the question that is so hard to answer, which is why we do kind of land back at this, and then I don't blame the school systems to say, well, okay, well, if that is the number one indicator, well, then I need to make sure that our kids are really good at the SAT. One, I look at that from your point of view, like great business opportunity, right? Like, you're doing one-on-one. Can you help? Can you help the school districts kind of at that level?
Yeah.
Like, there should be a course in here, like, right? Like, like if we really,
and we partner with school districts, we partner with schools to offer courses at scale. Absolutely. Now, as a business opportunity, I think it's great. However, I also think as a student opportunity, it's great, right? Like, you could go as a student and pick up my book from Amazon for $25 or go to the library and get books for free. But no one wants to hear that they have to sit and study. Everyone wants the easy path. They want to hire me personally as a one-on-one tutor. You don't have to do that. Like, you could get the same knowledge from books and sit in a library like I did and raise your score. But that takes self-control. But that takes motivation. But that takes hard work. Oh, wait, these are all the metrics that measure success in life, right? And all the data now, Yale, Dartmouth, they just released this data. That standardized test scores are still the best predictor of success for college GPAs and future success, more so than your high school GPA. And that makes total sense because the grade inflation, maybe 20, 30 years ago when you and I went to high school and middle school, GPAs made a lot more sense. There was a lot more granularity. But I mean, I see kids now with 5.5 GPAs. What does that even mean? Like, there's just so much insanity around GPAs now.
Yeah, for sure. And I played the game. I went to a high school where I'm going to botch the stat here, but you may actually know. But it was a school where they were saying 1% of all perfect, and I don't know if it was SAT or ACT scores, were coming from this one school.
Oh, wow.
And because it was all, I mean, it was college prep. It was 100% expected. Everyone goes to college. It was a matter of what, it wasn't a matter of like getting into college. It was like what level of college. And I learned because I got a slacker mentality in me that's built into me. And it was kind of that point of your GPA. I knew I can take an AP or an honors class and probably get a B, and that would have been a 4.5.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, okay, I can probably get a 4.5 on here and, without working as hard. But to your point, if I would have not taken that class and I would take it regular, I would probably still have to work just as hard or harder to get an A, which would count as a 4.0. So there is the aspect of like this, like everyone's playing the game, right? Like everyone is playing this game that's created. And, there's no harm in anyone trying to figure out, how do I win this game? Right?
Yeah.
Like we, yeah.
I mean, does that not mimic life, right? Like if you look at like business and entrepreneurship and career, it's all, at the end of the day, we're all playing games. Everyone's trying to get ahead and win and capture more market share or get the next promotion. It's not that dissimilar from life, to make everyone equal is not how the real world is. At least in America, maybe in China or North Korea.
I know, but that's what I think is so interesting. Is like like I always say, like I live in these like kind of like competing worlds where like 50% of my time is with entrepreneurs. And like really big thinking of like, how do we change system structure, like have more of this like win type of mentality. And then you get into like these K-12 conferences or education conferences, and it's a total opposite. It's about equity and access for everyone and inclusion. And not to say that businesses aren't doing that and there's not like carryover. And at the end of the day, I really think people are good and they like the,
and to that point, I want to be really clear. I believe in equal opportunity. I just don't believe in making everyone equal.
Yeah.
And that's different, right? Because everyone should have the same opportunity to study, work hard, and be rewarded. Absolutely.
Yeah.
However, I do not believe that at the end outcome that everyone should be equal, no matter how hard they studied, worked hard, whether that's in education or business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think that's where there's kind of this more in this moment in time where education is kind of like struggling with that right now. They're trying to answer.
People get that confused. It's about equal opportunity, not making everyone equal.
Exactly.
I really just want to be clear with people on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm 100% agree with you like that. And I think that's where a little bit of my struggle is. Like I was just at a conference and it was like almost this view of like, this utopian view of like, well, that's great. I think that's great to talk about and strive for, but then we also have to talk, there's a reality here of what it is. And sometimes that...
And really you do a disservice to students and children by making everyone equal, because when they get into the real world, that's not how it works, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so looking at just that pure opportunity is how do you give everyone the best opportunity to succeed? And I think that's where the K-12 sector is just honestly like they're just really struggling with what does that look like with a system that has been built up over the last 100 years, that it makes it really hard to change directions. Even if it seems like it could be a pretty minor thing, it's just really hard to implement any type of change in the system right now. So I always just come back to
it's a giant bureaucracy, very hard, difficult to change. I wish we could snap our fingers and make it right, but I think there's a lot of people working on it. I think some people are working in the wrong direction, as I mentioned, but I think there's enough people, at least from what I'm seeing in the colleges, realizing that maybe we had it right 20, 30 years ago. And, we've built a lot of great entrepreneurs, a lot of great career folks have come out of that education system.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think that we don't need to fix what's not broken. Not saying that there aren't lots of pieces that are broken right now, but I think we just need to get back to the basics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the message like that you're doing too, and I think I think there is a really cool movement, and what I get really excited about is that you get kind of the younger generation. They are just really driven. They really want to success. They don't know what that road to success always looks like, and it doesn't always have to look the same. So I think there's this drive, and I think you're, I agree with you. I mean, if we could have more people like have that drive, I would love to pinpoint how do I think all the adults want to figure out how do I give that to a kid, and I don't know what the answer is. Like why you had that drive, why I had internal drive. Like some people, I don't know what that is. I think that's a fascinating question that I would love to.
Some of it is you're born with it and genetic, I'm sure. I can see a lot of my drive coming from my dad. I'm sure probably you can see that in your parents, potentially, I don't know, but some of it may be genetic, some of it may be environmental, but a lot of it is family, I think, and where you grew up, circumstances. I grew up in a pretty poor area, my parents' motel, saw a lot of bad circumstances from folks who did not graduate from college, so it really made me wanted to do well and get out of that situation. Went to bad public schools with 40% dropout rate. So not saying that you have to come from bad circumstances. A lot of times, if you come from good circumstances, you also get really inspired to do just as well as your parents or your peers, et cetera. So there's you can come out of any circumstance 100%. But I want to touch on something you said, which was so a lot of kids don't know what success, that path looks like, or parents don't know what to give them. And I think that's okay. I don't, because life is like that, right? Life is where, you're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. You don't always know the right path to success. You have to try things, test them, see if they work, and it's an iterative process. Now, that's an iterative process. I'm speaking of business and entrepreneurship, but that works in science, that works in career, that works in education. You have to try, test, see if it works, and if it doesn't, you pivot, and you iterate, and you change. That's really what success is about. It's not about, well, this is the path to success, I must do X, Y, and Z, and then I will be successful. That almost never works out.
Yeah, it's one of those things too. And hearing you're 12 years into your company, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and it seems like somewhere in that 8 to 12 year mark. And if you just say the average, it's that 10 years. Say show me every overnight success, and you can find 10 years of hard work behind that. And everyone that I've done, maybe, there's a few where they may have hit it really early and they're having success, in year 1 through 3. But most of the time it is that. It's a lot of just grind and sticking to it and that grit to just say I'm not going to give up. And that's one of those things. I don't know how you teach that other than other than people just
go in the arena sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is okay. Yeah. And that's what I try to communicate to students and parents is, all of this, I know I'm making your student work hard right now by studying and, coming to class and, doing this practice and, all this stuff that you don't want to do or that your student doesn't want to do. But I promise you, it will serve them better in their future life to have these skills of time management, grit, like you said. It doesn't matter if they're going to be an entrepreneur. It doesn't matter if they're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Whatever they go into, these are transferable skills. Communication, there's just so many good skills that will come out of this. And that's what I think schools miss. I think schools miss, this is really what we're trying to teach students. It's not that they need to learn Edgar Allan Poe's poem. It's that they need to study for this exam and, come prepared, et cetera, and show up, et cetera. That's really what's important.
Yeah. All right. So I have one education question that I want to get back, and then I have one more on the business side.
Yeah.
So your school experience, what do you wish it was different, or what were the things that you're and I'm so glad I went through that, or I wish something was different, or what's your takeaway of kind of your experience as a student?
Yeah. So I went to public school in Las Vegas, Nevada. Vegas is not exactly known for an excellent education system. But with that being said, we had I think it was a 37% dropout rate when I went to high school. Now it's down to 23%. So Vegas is getting a little bit better. But what I will say, for those that have the opportunity, what I loved about my particular education was I went to, magnet programs. I'm sure that your listeners are familiar with them. So I went to a math and science magnet program in an inner city public school. And that's typically where they're at, or any magnet program is because they're trying to attract better students to these low income and urban schools. And I would say it was the best experience because, one, I got really good peers in the math and science program that motivated me, that I was surrounded by. But at the same time, I wasn't in some like ritzy prep school. I was, in the inner city with regular kids who had real problems. So I got to, have the great academic background. On top of that, I feel like what was almost more important was being able to relate to everyone, right? Which is the social aspect of not just being in this bubble. So I loved it. I thought it was a great mix. Now, you could like it's all about perspective. There are other people that I know who had the same education and said I hated it, right? Like I did, so it's totally about perspective. But from my perspective, I think it was a fantastic way for a student to both learn educationally as well as socially.
Yeah, cool. And I asked you that because I know a lot of people over in Clark County schools, and I'm seeing the change that they're doing, and I'm just, I'm curious to hear like what are those things, because I mean, you could sit here and be like
positive progress. Like I said, the dropout rate's coming down, the schools are getting better, the students are getting better. I don't know if I'd be the best student anymore. There's just so many good students now.
But they should be proud of you too, of coming from that system. I think so many times there's that negative perception of, like just certain schools, or they'll get that thing, but be like, you know what, there are a lot of people who have done really well. So were there things in there, and it's cool to hear like the magnet, because they're expanding the magnet program.
Yeah, and I think that's important for parents listening to hear too. Is your student can succeed in any school or school district. It's if you're geographically tied to somewhere you don't think is great in schools, I know a lot of parents get kind of anxiety or worried about that, but I'm a perfect example of a student who did extremely well in one of the worst school districts in the nation, right? And so your student can thrive, and that's why I said, I think I mentioned it earlier, like a lot of times it's on the student having self-motivation, and it's on the parents to instill that self-motivation, really value education in the home. And that's what was the success formula for me.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I want to hear how did all the Shark Tank stuff come about?
We didn't even touch on it.
I know.
Right?
Let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. So for the listeners that don't know, I was on Shark Tank in 2016. So it was almost, it was a bit ago, like 8 years ago. Pitched my company, Prep Expert, SAT and ACT courses on the show. Ended up making a deal with Mark Cuban, who's been an amazing investor, advocate, and partner for the company ever since. Mark invested $250,000 for 20% equity. The deal went through. I think it's been totally worth it, because Mark's helped us make some great business licensing deals, marketing for us. We've co-authored books. We've co-invested in other education companies. I just did a panel with him on entrepreneurship last week with the Obama Foundation. So it's been really, really an amazing opportunity. And then obviously the appearance on Shark Tank really skyrocketed Prep Expert. It took us from a small business in Vegas to now Prep Expert, our courses. We've taught, as I mentioned, over 100,000 kids. We've teach people from not only all over the United States, but from all over the world in our online SAT and ACT courses.
Awesome. So what's next for you?
Next for me, I would say I'm really excited about this brand new book that I just launched. We had mentioned it earlier. It's called Prep Expert Digital SAT Playbook. I spent over 1,000 hours putting together this book to make my elite strategies at Prep Expert accessible to everyone. So you can get it for around $25, or even the Kindle version on $10 on Amazon. As I mentioned, you don't need a whole lot of money to, study for an exam and really change your life opportunities. Mine, as I mentioned, or Prep Expert, our motto is change your score, change your life. What do I mean by that? Getting a perfect score on the SAT totally changed my life. I, got into the Ivy League. I got tons of scholarships, got college completely paid for. Didn't have to pay a dime. And we have story after story of Prep Expert students doing that and getting $250,000, $500,000, $100,000 scholarships. I totally think for a 2-hour and 14-minute exam, it's worth studying and getting those dollars back. So that's really my mission. I'm on you said, what's next for me? I'm on a $1 billion scholarship mission. So as I mentioned, we've helped students win $100 million in scholarships, but I really want to help over the next 10 years. That was the last 10 years. Over the next 10 years, I want to 10x that, help students win over $1 billion in scholarships, because college tuition costs are getting way too expensive. I mean, the average cost of college is close to $200,000 now. Student debt is hitting almost $2 trillion. And we can combat that now with merit-based scholarships. And I do that all the time with parents and students at Prep Expert. So if you want to learn more about Prep Expert SAT courses or our books, head over to prepexpert.com.
Perfect. And we'll have that in the links as well. There was one other thing in there too, that from your book too, of like, even if they're like that trend was for schools to not look at SAT scores for enrollment, but it's still a huge play into the scholarship. And obviously, now that the trend's kind of reversing, that's still a huge aspect of your SAT scores are tied.
Yeah, I would say it's actually a more important reason to take the exams, even than college admissions itself. And most students probably and most parents can, you guys can get into college, but getting it paid for is a whole nother ballgame. And that's what I really help students do is reduce or even eliminate their college costs through their merit-based test scores.
Perfect. Awesome. Sean, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for being on the show and talking through this with me.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, Kevin. We really got into some of the details here and excited to release this and hopefully be on again someday.
Yeah, perfect. All right, the listeners, if you're not already subscribed, just hit subscribe wherever you're listening. And betterlearningpodcast.com is our hub for everything. So if you go there, if you have an idea for a topic or if you think you'd be a good guest, go through there as well. And it has links to pretty much everything that we have on here. So Sean, great talking to you, and audience, we will talk to you soon. The views and opinions expressed in the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and of my guest, and do not necessarily represent the organizations we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.